I didn't feel anything when my husband died. Not grief, not relief. Just a kind of stillness, like the moment after a car backfires and you're waiting to understand what you heard. The paramedics had already taken him. My daughter was somewhere behind me, on the phone with her brother, and I was standing in the hallway of the house I'd lived in for 31 years, looking at the door to my husband's study. It was still locked, even then, even after everything. I want to tell you something before I go further. I was not an unhappy woman. That's the part nobody believes, and I understand why. But I genuinely did not know. I thought we had a quiet life. I thought my husband was a private man. I thought the locked door meant he needed space. And I respected that, because that's what you do when you love someone. You give them room. You don't push. You tell yourself that trust looks like letting go. I told myself that for 31 years. My husband's name was Bernard. Bernie to everyone who knew him. He was 68 when he died. A massive stroke, fast, no warning, on a Tuesday morning in March while he was making coffee. I found him on the kitchen floor. The coffee pot was still running. I remember thinking, even in that moment, that I should turn it off before it burned. That's the kind of woman I am. Practical. Steady. I've always kept things running. We met in 1989 at a church potluck in Dayton, Ohio. I had brought a green bean casserole. He had brought nothing, showed up with his hands in his pockets and a smile that made you feel like he'd just thought of something clever. He was handsome in a quiet way. The kind of man who doesn't take up space at first and then gradually takes up all of it, and you don't notice until the room feels small. We married in 1991. I was 34, he was 37. I had a job I liked at the county library, cataloging collections, ordering new acquisitions. I loved that job. I was good at it. Bernie didn't ask me to quit. He never asked me to do anything directly. That was the thing about him. He would just make things harder, slowly, incrementally, until the easier path was the one he'd already chosen for you. Within 2 years of the wedding, his work schedule had become unpredictable enough that someone needed to be home. He traveled for his consulting business. Project management for manufacturing firms, he said, though I couldn't have told you much more than that. The details slipped away. He never explained twice. Within 4 years, I had left the library. I told people I'd chosen to focus on the home. In a way I had. I just don't think I understood what I was choosing. We had one son. His name is Timothy. He lives in Portland now with his wife and their 2 kids, and he calls me every Sunday, and I love him more than anything in this world. But Timothy was close to his father in a way I never fully understood. Bernie coached his little league team. They watched football together every Sunday for 20 years. Whatever Timothy knew or suspected about his father, he kept to himself. I've never asked him directly. I'm not ready for that conversation yet. The study was on the 2nd floor, at the end of the hall. It had been Bernie's from the beginning. He set it up the first week we moved in. Bookshelves, a heavy oak desk he'd bought at an estate sale, a filing cabinet the color of old pewter. He installed the lock himself, a deadbolt, the kind you'd put on an exterior door. I watched him do it, and I remember thinking it was odd, but I said nothing. For 31 years, I said nothing. The rule was simple. That room was his. I did not go in. I did not ask what was in it. When the cleaning woman came on Fridays, she skipped that door without being told. I never questioned it out loud. I told myself it was where he kept work files, sensitive client information, things that required discretion. I believed that for a long time. But there were moments, small ones, the kind you file away and try not to look at directly. Once, about 15 years in, I needed the stapler. We'd run out downstairs, and I was wrapping a birthday gift for Timothy, and I knew there was one in the study because I'd seen Bernie use it. I knocked on the door. He opened it maybe 8 inches, took the stapler off a shelf near the entrance without letting me see past him, and handed it to me. The whole exchange took maybe 12 seconds. He smiled the whole time. I thanked him and went back downstairs. I've thought about that moment a lot recently. There were financial things too, though I didn't understand them as such at the time. Our accounts were joint, checking, savings, but Bernie handled everything. I had a card on the account and I used it for groceries, household things, whatever Timothy needed for school. If I ever looked at the balance, it seemed fine. More than fine, actually. Comfortable. Bernie worked hard and earned well, and I didn't have reason to look closer. I didn't have reason, or I told myself I didn't. He drove me to my doctor's appointments. Every single one for the last 15 years or so after I had a minor health scare and he decided I needed support. He sat in the waiting room at first, and then gradually he started coming into the exam room. My doctors were used to it. They'd ask him questions. He'd answer. I'd sit on the exam table in my paper gown and watch him talk about my health, and I would feel, sometimes, a strange floating sensation, like I was watching a scene I wasn't actually in. I mentioned this to my sister once, years ago. She frowned and said, "That seems like a lot." I changed the subject. My sister lives in Florida, and we talk on the phone every few weeks, and I love her, but there are things I never said to anyone. Things I wrapped up carefully and put somewhere dark and didn't touch. After Bernie died, the house got very quiet. My daughter-in-law came to stay for the first week. She is a kind woman, practical in the best way, and she handled the funeral arrangements with a competence that I was grateful for and slightly ashamed of needing. Timothy flew in. We all moved through the house together, 3 adults being careful with each other, and I kept looking at the door at the end of the hall. On the 9th day, after Timothy and his wife had gone back to Portland, I found the key. I wasn't looking for it. I was going through Bernie's nightstand, just trying to clear some space, the way you do after someone dies, moving through their objects slowly, trying to figure out what to keep, and it was taped to the underside of the bottom drawer. A small brass key on a paper clip. The kind of thing you'd hide if you didn't want it found, but also needed to be certain you could find it again. I held it for a long time, then I walked to the end of the hall. I don't know what I expected. I think if I'm honest, I expected files, folders, the detritus of a consulting business I'd never fully understood. Maybe something embarrassing, old magazines, some collection he'd never mentioned, a hobby that seemed foolish in retrospect. I did not expect what I found. The room was organized. That's the first thing I noticed. Everything in its place. The bookshelves held business texts and binders, labeled in Bernie's small, even handwriting. The desk was clear except for a lamp, a legal pad, and a photograph. The photograph was of a woman I had never seen before. She was younger than me by 20 years, maybe more, standing in front of what looked like a lake house. She was squinting into the sun and laughing at something. On the back, in Bernie's handwriting, a date. 14 years ago. I set the photograph down and opened the filing cabinet. I was in that room for 4 hours. What I found, and I want to be careful here because I'm still not entirely done understanding it all, was a second life. Not in the dramatic sense. There was no other family, no second wife, no children I didn't know about. What there was money. Account statements I'd never seen. Investment accounts in Bernie's name only. A brokerage account. A LLC registered in Delaware that I had never heard of, with Bernie listed as the sole member. Correspondence with a financial advisor whose name meant nothing to me, discussing portfolios, transfers, property. There was a piece of land in rural Tennessee, 32 acres, purchased 12 years ago. Cash transaction. Deed in Bernie's name only. There was a lake house. I sat down on the floor of that room. The carpet was gray and thin and smelled faintly of old paper, and I stayed there for a long time. Here's what I understood, sitting on that floor. I had lived in a house with a man for 31 years, and I had not known who he was. Not really. I had known the version of him that he allowed me to see, which was the version of him that needed me to stay exactly where I was, looking exactly where he pointed, never asking about the room at the end of the hall. He had not hidden things from me out of shame. I came to understand that later when I talked to an attorney. He had hidden things from me out of intention. He'd structured it carefully. The consulting business, the separate accounts, the LLC, they were not accidents, they were architecture. I called my sister that evening. I said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to just listen for a while." She listened. I talked for almost 2 hours. When I was done, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Oh, honey, how long have you known something was wrong?" I thought about the locked door, the stapler, the doctor's appointments, the floating feeling. I said, "I think I always knew. I just didn't have a word for it." The attorney I found was a woman named, well, I'll call her my attorney because that's what she is and what matters. She specialized in estate law and had, she told me, handled situations like this before. That phrase gave me pause. I asked what she meant by that. She explained, carefully and without drama, that it was not uncommon for one spouse to maintain significant financial assets outside the knowledge of the other. That the legal term for what Bernie had done, depending on the specifics, might include dissipation of marital assets or fraudulent concealment. That Tennessee, where the land was, had specific statutes. That Delaware, where the LLC was registered, had others. She said the words in the calm, informational way of someone who had learned that information, delivered plainly, was the kindest thing she could offer. I wrote everything down. Over the following 3 months, we unraveled it. The brokerage accounts, the LLC, the land, the lake house. The lake house with the woman at the lake who I still don't know the name of and have decided, for now, not to try to find out. Some things you have a right to know, some things you have a right to leave alone. My attorney filed the necessary documents. We worked through probate. There were conversations with the Delaware Secretary of State's office, with a title company in Tennessee, with Bernie's financial advisor, who was uncomfortable and formal and said very little that was useful. In the end, the assets came to me. Not easily, not quickly, but they came. I sold the lake house. I did not visit it first. I asked my attorney to handle it. The land in Tennessee I kept, for now, I don't know why, 32 acres of nothing in particular, but it's mine, which is a feeling I'm still getting used to. What I want to say, the thing I've been circling around this whole time, is not about Bernie. It's about me. About the woman who handed back the stapler and said nothing, who sat on the exam table while her husband answered for her, who walked past a locked door for 31 years and told herself it was privacy, not a wall. I was not stupid. I want to be clear about that. I have a library science degree. I read constantly. I am capable of thinking clearly. But I was inside something I didn't have a name for, and when you're inside something like that, the fog doesn't feel like fog. It feels like air. It feels like just how things are. There's a term for what Bernie did. I've read about it since. Coercive control. It doesn't require violence. It doesn't require shouting. It requires only that one person quietly, systematically remove the other person's ability to see clearly, their finances, their medical care, their sense of their own perception. You don't realize you've been erased. You just feel gradually like less. My granddaughter is 14. She came to visit last summer and we sat on the back porch and she asked me, out of nowhere the way teenagers do, what I would tell my younger self if I could. I thought about it seriously. She deserved a serious answer. I said, pay attention to the things you're not allowed to ask about. Not because secrets are always sinister, but because in a partnership, a real one, there are no locked doors. If someone builds a wall inside your shared life and tells you it's for your own good, or that it's just the way things are, or that you wouldn't understand anyway, believe the wall, not the explanation. She nodded like she was filing it away. I hope she keeps it. I still live in this house. People ask if I'm going to sell it, and I say I haven't decided. What I don't say is that some mornings I come downstairs and the house feels different than it did before. Not lighter, exactly. More accurate. Like a room where the furniture has been moved back to where it actually belongs. The study is a guest room now. I painted it myself, a pale yellow that my sister said was cheerful and Timothy said was very mom, which I took as a compliment. I put a new bed in there and a lamp and a small bookshelf with novels I've been meaning to read for years. The filing cabinet is gone. The desk is gone. The lock on the door is gone too. I removed it the second week. It took me longer than it should have because I'm not particularly handy, and I had to watch a video on my phone to figure out how to use the right size screwdriver. But I did it myself. I didn't ask anyone. I stood in the doorway when it was done and looked at the clean space where the lock had been, just a small circle of bare wood, and I thought about 31 years of walking past that door and telling myself it was fine. It wasn't fine, but I'm still here. That's the part I hold on to. After 31 years and a locked room and a brass key taped to the underside of a drawer, I'm still here, and the door is open, and the light in there is exactly the color I chose.